Some wounds don't bleed on the outside, yet they stain everything we are. Sometimes it only takes one lie, one pointed finger, to strip away years of dignity like old wallpaper. I know that story too well. My name is Agnes Whitmore. I'm 72 years old. And even though you might see me today, watering my porch plants with a soft smile, there was a time when I slept on park benches, clutching the only blanket I had left, wondering if I'd ever feel like a person again. Not because of what they said about me, but because I had started to forget who I truly was. I worked as a cook in a public school for 32 years, 32 winters serving hot soup, 32 springs decorating cupcakes for birthday kids who didn't always have cakes at home. That kitchen was my pride, my second home. I wasn't just feeding kids, I was feeding their joy. But one day everything crumbled. A missing envelope, a new principal with cold eyes, and suddenly I was the thief from the cafeteria. No trial, no voice, just whispers, turned backs, and a door slammed shut on everything I'd built. They threw me into the streets without warning. My co-workers, people I laughed with for decades, wouldn't look me in the eye. The union ignored me. The administration expelled me like I was a virus. And me? I had never stolen a dime. But still, I ended up with no roof, no friends, no voice. For months, I learned to make myself small, to hide my face, to survive. But what hurt most wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was losing the sense of who I was, becoming someone even I didn't recognize. It's my granddaughter who finally gave me the courage to speak. "Grandma," she said, "your strength deserves to be heard." And maybe she's right. I don't speak out of bitterness. I speak to heal. Because I've learned that pain, when silenced too long, turns to stone in the chest. But when told, when shared, it becomes a path, a way for others not to feel so alone in their battles. In these years, I've learned that injustice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, slides in unnoticed, and poisons everything. I was a hard-working woman, kind, proud of my quiet life in a small town. But that didn't matter. They erased me with a rumor. They destroyed me with silence. And yet I'm still here, telling what should have never been hidden. I don't know what hurts more, the ache of sleeping on concrete or the burning shame when people walked past pretending I didn't exist. I truly believed I would die. Like that, unseen, forgotten. But deep inside, something kept beating, a tiny spark planted by my mother long ago. Her voice used to say, "They can take your job, your house, but they can't take your honor unless you hand it to them." Today, when I water my porch plants each morning, I know I'm also tending the parts of me that nearly vanished. And though the past is heavy, I refuse to hide it. Because every pie I bake, every child that waves at me from the sidewalk, is a quiet victory over everything they tried to destroy. This is my story, and I'm finally ready to tell it. If this story stirs something in you, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep sharing stories like this. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Now come with me. Let me take you back to where it all began, in a little town tucked between hills and laughter, where the bread always smelled like home. I grew up in Willow Ridge, a tiny speck of a town, tucked away in the hills of Kentucky. Just a handful of dirt roads, chickens roaming freely, and neighbors who knew the names of your grandparents, and your dogs too. Our house was no more than a wooden box with a tin roof, always creaking in the wind and dripping during heavy rains. But inside, it pulsed with warmth. My mother smelled like clean laundry and cinnamon, and my father came home with calloused hands and a whistle on his lips. There were 4 of us kids, and I was the oldest. Just 10, I was already a second mother, stirring beans, sweeping floors, rocking crying babies to sleep. Each morning started with the rooster from the tanner's farm across the field, always a bit too early for my liking. Mama would be at the sink, elbow deep in cold, sudsy water, scrubbing someone else's clothes. I'd help dress the little ones, tie shoes, brush hair, and herd them down the gravel path to school. The walk was long, But we made a game of it, counting wildflowers, pretending we each were on secret missions, dreaming out loud about bicycles and movie theaters we'd probably never see. My daddy was a mason, building homes he could never afford to live in, but talking about each one like it was the Taj Mahal. "You see that porch?" he'd say. "Built that with my own hands." He didn't have much, but he gave us pride. In our name, in our work, in our word. Some days he brought home penny candy in a crumpled brown bag. We'd sit on the porch steps and share it one piece at a time, while the sky turned sherbet pink. I remember thinking I was the luckiest girl in the world. Nights were for stories. Mama had a way with words. She told us about women who chased down tornadoes or healed animals with their hands. We'd sit at her feet, wrapped in mismatched blankets, hanging on every word. Her voice was low and slow, like honey poured over bread. That voice still echoes in me. It was a lullaby, a lesson, and a prayer all at once. Before we went to sleep, she always touched our foreheads and said, "Tomorrow's going to be good. You'll see." We didn't have much. No TV, no toys from stores. But we had an old chalkboard my dad brought home from a job site, and that was my universe. I played school with pebbles as my students. I wrote long letters to no one in particular. I wanted to be a teacher, to read every book ever written, to help other kids feel seen. Our real school was a one-room building with creaky floors and a kind teacher named Miss Ethel. She smelled like lavender and paper and once told me, "Agnes, your words matter." That stuck with me. Sundays were sacred. Mama made chicken and biscuits from scratch, and the whole house smelled like heaven. After dinner, Daddy pulled out his harmonica and played while we danced barefoot in the grass. Sometimes neighbors came over, bringing peach cobbler or lemonade, and we'd laugh until our bellies hurt. It didn't matter that our shoes had holes or that our dresses were hand-me-downs. We were rich, in rhythm, in love, in the kind of joy that doesn't cost a dime. I never felt poor. Not once. I felt cared for. I felt like we belonged to something bigger than our problems. Mama had a saying, "Clean hands, full heart, quiet soul, that's wealth." She taught me to walk with my head high, to say please and thank you, to never lie even when it was easier. Those lessons became my bones. My little brother Tommy followed me everywhere. He had crooked teeth and a laugh that could melt snow. Clara, my younger sister, was a quiet thinker who collected pressed flowers in old books. I felt like their guardian more than their sister. Their tears were mine to wipe, their hunger mine to feed. Even then, I understood love not as a feeling but as a duty, a holy one. Seasons shaped our lives. In winter, we patched blankets with old shirts. In summer, we hung hammocks between trees and counted fireflies. Our favorite time was the county fair. Daddy would save all year just to buy us cotton candy. One time, I wore a dress Mama made from an old curtain, and I felt like a movie star walking through those dusty fairgrounds. I'll never forget the day a storm ripped through town, tearing our roof clear off. Water poured in from every direction. We grabbed pots, buckets, even our school lunch boxes to catch the leaks. Instead of crying, Mama made hot soup, and we ate it on the floor, laughing at the chaos. "See?" she said. "Still a home." That night I learned resilience isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a bowl of soup in a flooded kitchen. I was always full of questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do people get sick? Why do some kids not have dads? Mama answered everyone with patience and warmth. She believed knowledge was power and stories were armor. As I washed dishes or swept the porch, I would daydream whole novels in my head. I didn't know it then, but those daydreams would one day keep me alive. After school, we did homework at the kitchen table and played until the fireflies came out. Our neighbor, old Miss Lottie, would sometimes bring us plums from her tree. We'd eat them sitting on the back steps, juice dripping down our chins, sticky and satisfied. That taste, tart and sweet, still brings back every summer of my childhood. Mama taught me how to sew buttons and mend socks. You got to know how to fix things, she'd say. The world won't always be kind to girls like us. I didn't fully grasp what she meant, but I listened. I always listened. Her words became my compass, long after she was gone. Some nights we didn't have meat, just rice, beans, and fried apples. But we never went to bed hungry. Mama made everything taste like comfort. I learned early on that gratitude fills you in ways food can't. Every hand-me-down was received with reverence. Every neighbor's kindness was tucked into our hearts like treasure. Daddy never missed dinner, even when he was bone-tired. He'd sit at the table, kiss Mama's hand, and say, "You done it again, sweetheart." That's simple. Praise lit up her whole face. Watching that, I learned that love wasn't fancy. It was steady. It showed up. I remember getting sick one winter. Fever, chills, the works. Mama had no money for a doctor, so she sat by my bed all night with cool cloths and old songs. By morning, I was better. That's when I learned that care is a kind of medicine, that presence is a kind of power. We bathed in the creek. It was freezing, but we laughed and splashed like it was the fanciest pool in the world. On quiet days, I'd lie in the tall grass and stare at the stars, wondering what it would be like to grow up. I never imagined the cliffs I'd have to climb. There was a peace in those days I've never felt again. We lived by the sun, the garden, the rhythm of life itself. We didn't have calendars or clocks, but we knew when it was dinner time by the smell of cornbread. We were poor in money, yes, but not in joy. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the creak of our floorboards and smell Mama's molasses cookies. Those memories are my anchor, because when everything else fell apart later, it was that girl, the one raised in love, who kept me from disappearing completely. It was a simple childhood, but it built the spine I'd one day need to survive. When the world tried to break me, it didn't count on the roots I had. Roots deep in love, deep in dirt, deep in truth. I remember the exact day everything changed. It was a Wednesday in early October, the kind where the wind carries the first hint of winter and the sky looks tired. Mama woke up coughing, a dry, stubborn cough that shook her whole frame. We thought it was just a cold. She even insisted on going out to wash clothes behind the house, as always. But by nightfall, she couldn't stand up. Daddy carried her into bed, his face pale with worry. He walked 5 miles to fetch the town doctor, and when he returned, his eyes were swollen and wet. Pneumonia, he said. She needs to rest. But the look in his eyes told me it was worse than that. The days that followed blurred into one long, quiet prayer. I did everything I could. Fed my siblings, warmed soup for Mama, kept the fire going. She could barely whisper, but when she looked at me, I understood. Keep going, Agnes. Hold it together. I bathed her, braided her hair, placed damp cloths on her forehead. But her glow dimmed by the hour, like a candle gasping for air. I knew. Even before it happened, I knew. She died just before dawn. The world outside was still dark. Daddy wailed, a sound I'll never forget. Tommy and Clara cried themselves hoarse. But me, I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there frozen, watching the only warmth in our home slip away forever. We buried her beneath a willow tree in the churchyard, with nothing but a wooden cross and a few wildflowers. After that, the light in our house went out, and something cold moved in. Daddy stopped talking. He stopped working. He spent hours sitting on the porch, staring at nothing, sometimes with a bottle in hand. I tried to fill the silence, cook, clean, help my siblings with their schoolwork, but the weight was too much. I was just a child trying to wear a mother's shoes. Some days, we didn't even have bread. Kind neighbors brought what they could, but no one had much. We became ghosts in our own home, shadows of who we were when Mama was alive. That's when Aunt Carol showed up, Mama's older sister from out of town. She arrived with boxes of canned food, a new coat for me, and a heavy purse full of promises. At first I thought maybe God had answered my whispered prayers. She cooked, cleaned, took over like she belonged. Daddy was too broken to object. He welcomed her like a lifeline. But there was something about the way she looked at me. Too intense, too long, like she wasn't seeing a girl. She was sizing up something else entirely. Soon Aunt Carol ran everything. She told Daddy when to sleep, when to go to work, what to spend. She pulled me out of school. Your family needs you now, she said. Books won't feed your siblings. I obeyed even as a part of me crumbled. The world outside shrunk. My life became that house. The firewood, the laundry, the silence. The house stopped being a home. It became a place of orders, of cold stares, of held breath. Daddy was barely there. When he did come home, he smelled like smoke and liquor. Aunt Carol filled the space with her voice, her control, her strange affection. I tried to keep my distance, but the warning signs were there, the touches that lasted too long, the way she'd call me to her room for no reason. I didn't understand what I was feeling, but my skin crawled. One night I was tucking Tommy into bed when I felt this sharp pang in my stomach, a fear so deep it made me dizzy. I realized something awful. We were alone, really alone. Mama was gone. Daddy was gone in his own way. And whatever was coming, it was coming for me first. Aunt Carol's presence grew like mold, slowly, silently, until it was everywhere. What began as help turned into total control. Daddy barely spoke anymore. He just nodded at her, handed over his paychecks, and disappeared into himself. She decided what we ate, when we slept, how we dressed. I was no longer Agnes, the oldest daughter. I was her assistant, her servant, her target. At 12, I had already learned to walk without making a sound. She started with comments. "You're growing up fast," she'd say, her eyes narrowing as they slid down my frame. "You have to be careful. Men notice things." Her words made my stomach tighten. They didn't sound like advice. They sounded like a warning wrapped in syrup. I tried to laugh them off, but inside I was shrinking, pulling into myself like a turtle sensing danger. Her hands were always busy, adjusting my clothes, brushing imaginary lint off my back, checking if I was clean behind the ears. I'd flinch, and she'd scold me. "Stop acting like I'm hurting you," she'd snap, then soften. "You're just sensitive." I started wearing Daddy's flannel shirts to hide my body. They hung past my knees and smelled like old tobacco, but they made me feel safer, less visible. At night she lingered outside my room. I could hear the creak of the hallway floorboards, the soft rustle of her robe. Sometimes she came in, pretending to check if I was cold. "Just making sure you're okay," she'd whisper, sitting on the edge of the bed too long, her hand brushing too close. I'd pretend to sleep, my fists clenched under the covers, counting backward from 100 over and over. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? Daddy was lost in his grief. Clara and Tommy were too young to understand. And in our small town, Aunt Carol was known as the good sister, the one who stepped up when tragedy hit. People brought her pies, thanked her at church. No one would believe the things I saw behind her polite smile. I began to study her, not like a child studies an adult, but like prey studies a predator. I learned her moods, the signs of when it was safe to move, when to vanish. I became quiet, obedient, not because I trusted her, but because I wanted her to underestimate me. That was the first crack in her control. She didn't know I was watching. She controlled my time. I wasn't allowed outside alone. Couldn't speak to boys. Couldn't go back to school. "The world's too dangerous for a girl like you," she'd say. "You're better off at home." I'd nod. But inside, I raged. I wrote in a notebook I kept hidden behind a loose floorboard. Just words, names, dates, things she said. It made me feel like I still existed. One day she caught me talking to Mrs. Florence, an elderly neighbor who always smiled at me through her screen door. That night, Aunt Carol dragged me into the kitchen. "Are you spreading lies about me?" she hissed. "Do you think anyone would take your word over mine?" She squeezed my wrist so hard it left bruises. I said nothing. That silence became my shield. Tommy started asking questions. "Why are you always sad? Why don't you play with us anymore?" I didn't know how to answer. I just told him I was tired. And I was. Tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid in my own home. Clara changed too. She became quieter, always watching. I think she sensed it. The danger, the shift in me. One night I caught her crying and didn't ask why. I just held her. That's when I made a vow. Whatever happened, I would protect her. And Tommy, even if it broke me. Aunt Carol's possessiveness grew darker. "You're mine now," she whispered once in my ear when no one else was around. "I saved you. You belong to me." I felt my heart stop. From then on, I slept in shifts, placing a chair under the doorknob, a screwdriver under my pillow. Not as a weapon, just something solid to hold on to when the night felt endless. My body started showing signs of stress, headaches, stomach pains, night sweats. No one noticed. No one asked. Became invisible during the day and hyper-aware at night. I learned which floorboards creaked, which doors didn't close right, where to hide if she came looking for me. One afternoon, I caught her staring at me while I was folding laundry. She didn't blink, just stood there watching, like a snake waiting to strike. I held the sheets tight, praying she'd leave. She did, but the silence she left behind was worse than any scream. She started accusing me of things. "You're flirting with your father," she spat once. I was horrified. "You think I don't see you trying to take him away from me?" That was the moment I realized she was unraveling, dangerous in a way I hadn't even begun to understand. I stopped looking in mirrors. I hated what I saw, not because of how I looked, but because I didn't see myself anymore. Just a shell of a girl who used to laugh, used to sing, used to dream about being a teacher. That girl was gone. All that was left was someone trying to survive another day. One evening, Clara asked, "Are we safe?" I didn't answer. I couldn't lie, but I took her hand and squeezed it. That was the best I could give her. Silent reassurance, a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. Some nights, I dreamed of Mama. She'd stand by the window, holding a basket of laundry, smiling at me. But when I tried to run to her, she'd fade. I'd wake up crying, then force myself to stop. Crying was dangerous. Crying made noise. Every move I made was calculated. I became a ghost. In my own life, she didn't know that even ghosts learn how to haunt back. Not with screams, but with planning, with patience, with a will that refuses to die. Survival became a language I spoke fluently. In silence, in stillness, in the careful way I folded towels so she wouldn't say they were sloppy. I woke up before anyone else, swept the porch, boiled water for oatmeal, and waited. Waited for the sound of her steps. Waited for the next command. I lived like a ghost in my own skin, shrinking more each day. If I was invisible, I was safe, or at least safer. I stopped wearing anything that fit. I dug through old storage trunks and found baggy clothes that hid everything. Daddy's old work shirts became my armor. I tied my hair back so tightly it hurt. I wanted to look plain, ordinary, forgettable, and I was good at it. I became a shadow that moved through the house without a sound. I memorized every creak in the floorboards. I knew which windows whistled in the wind, which cabinet doors stuck. I used that knowledge like a map. Routes to avoid her, ways to escape notice. I even taught Tommy and Clara to move quietly, to speak in hushed tones. We were like mice living in the walls of our own home. At night I barely slept. My body would rest for an hour, maybe two, before I jolted awake. I'd stare at the ceiling, counting my breath, holding my little screwdriver under the blanket. The sound of her feet down the hallway was enough to make my heart gallop. But more than fear, there was shame, a sticky, suffocating feeling I didn't know how to name back then. My body began to betray me. I had constant stomach aches, migraines that pulsed behind my eyes, rashes from stress, but I didn't complain. Complaining wasn't safe. I wore long sleeves in the heat, hid bruises under socks, made excuses like, "I slipped," or "the cabinet door fell." But no one ever asked. No one wanted to see. The only place I let myself feel anything was the bathroom. I'd sit on the edge of the tub and just breathe. No crying. Crying was a luxury. I'd press a towel to my face to muffle the sounds if a sob slipped out. Sometimes I'd hum songs my mama used to sing, just to remember her voice, just to remind myself I once belonged to someone good. One night I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her shoulders slumped. She looked older than 12, older than time. I leaned in and whispered, "You're still in there. I know you are." But even that felt like a lie some days. Aunt Carol became more possessive, more controlling. "I'm the only one who cares about you," she'd whisper in the dark. "You should be grateful." And I almost believed her. That's what made it worse. The part of me that thought maybe this was all I deserved. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I behaved better, it would stop. Once she ripped a page out of my notebook and held it up. "What is this? A diary?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were wild. "I lied and said it was a story." "Lies!" she spat, and threw the paper into the fireplace. After that, I buried the notebook in the backyard, under the tree Mama used to sit beneath. That tree became my hiding place, not just for things, but for pieces of myself. Tommy brought me a drawing one day, a stick figure girl with a big smile and a flower in her hand. "It's you," he said. I forced a smile, patted his head, and hung it inside my closet door. It became my secret reminder that someone still saw me as whole, even if I didn't. Mrs. Florence, the old neighbor, continued waving at me every morning. Her kindness was the only sunlight I got some days. I wanted to run to her, tell her everything, but I didn't dare. What if she told Aunt Carol? What if she didn't believe me? So I smiled, tight-lipped, and kept walking. Birthdays came and went without candles. Mine passed quietly. No cake, no happy birthday, not even a nod. I sat in the pantry that night and whispered, "Happy birthday, Agnes." Just once. That was all I allowed myself. One flicker of acknowledgement before I returned to silence. I stopped praying for rescue. I started praying for strength. I prayed for the day I could leave, for the day I'd be tall enough, fast enough, old enough. I didn't know how long I could hold out, but I knew I had to. For Clara, for Tommy, for the part of me that refused to die. My father, he faded. Day by day he shrank into himself, guilt and grief thick around him like fog. Sometimes I'd find him staring at Mama's photo, lips moving silently. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Did he know? Did he care? I wanted to hate him, but mostly I missed him. Clara started sleeping in my bed again. She'd press close, eyes wide in the dark. I'd whisper silly stories, made-up fairy tales where girls like us had swords and wings and nobody could hurt them. She never said much, but she always smiled at the endings. That smile kept me going. I became two people, the obedient girl Aunt Carol praised in public, and the quiet warrior plotting in secret. I hid money in the seams of old coats. I memorized bus schedules from the back of Daddy's newspaper. I had no plan yet, just determination. There were times I thought of ending it all, of slipping away into the river behind our house, where the current was strong and fast. But then I'd see Clara's drawings or hear Tommy singing under his breath, and I'd remember they needed me. They were my heartbeat. I stopped. Thinking in years, I thought in days. Just get through this day, I'd say to myself each morning, then tomorrow, and somehow I did, one after the other, like laying bricks for a bridge I couldn't yet see, but knew I had to cross. And every night, before I drifted into my light, restless sleep, I'd whisper 3 words only I could hear. Not forever, not forever, because deep inside, I believed it, even if it was just a flicker. One day, this house would not be my prison. This silence would not be my name. And I'd find a way to breathe, to laugh again, to become the girl Mama once held and told, "You'll do something beautiful in this world, Agnes. Just wait." I was still waiting, but I wasn't giving up. My first act of resistance was a choice no one noticed. I stopped crying in front of her, not because the pain disappeared. Far from it. but because I realized my tears fed her control. She watched me closely, always searching for weakness. So I taught myself to blink back the ink, to hold my breath when the sobs threatened to rise. If I couldn't run, at least I could deny her the pleasure of seeing me break. I began studying her, not as a child studies an adult, but as prey studies a predator. I learned her patterns, when she was calm, when she drank too much, when she slipped into her sweet voice that made my skin crawl. I memorized every cue, like a soldier watching for signs of an ambush. I was only 12, but I became a master of strategy, always 2 steps ahead. She never locked her drawer. One night when her snores rumbled through the hallway, I crept into her room and found a letter she had written to a relative. In it, she called me ungrateful, said I was trouble and tempting fate. She was building a story in case anyone asked. I didn't take the letter, I just memorized every word. If she ever tried to accuse me of something, I'd be ready. The first person who seemed to truly see me was Mrs. Florence. One morning, as I walked past her garden, she held out a jar of blackberry jam. "You look thin, sweetheart," she said gently. I didn't respond. I just took the jar, nodded, and held back tears. After that, every Sunday she left something on her porch. Cookies, apples, sometimes a little note that said, "You matter." I never told her anything, but her quiet kindness lit a small, steady flame inside me. Then there was Reverend Harris at church. He once stopped me as we walked out the door and said, "You've got a strong spirit, Agnes. Don't let the world steal it from you." I held on to that sentence for weeks, repeating it in my head like a prayer. Even though he didn't know the truth somehow, he saw the storm in my eyes. I started keeping track, not just of her actions, but of mine. Every day I went without crying. Every meal I managed to sneak for Clara. Every bruise I covered without flinching became a quiet victory. I was still stuck. Yes, still afraid. But I was no longer powerless. Resistance had taken root. Clara noticed too. She watched me like a hawk, asking fewer questions but never leaving my side. One evening, after a particularly cruel comment from Aunt Carol, Clara slipped a note under my pillow. It said, "You're the strongest person I know." I cried that night, but only in the dark, where no one could see. I found small ways to reclaim myself. I sang under my breath when I was alone. I wrote secret poems in the dirt behind the shed and erased them with my foot. I collected string and broken buttons, telling myself I'd sew a dress one day. Something bright, something mine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Aunt Carol became suspicious. She'd say, "You're hiding something, aren't you?" I'd shrug. She didn't know I was watching her back now, waiting, calculating. I started setting tiny traps, moved her things slightly, left doors ajar. When she noticed, she blamed herself. It gave me hope. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't as in control as she thought. Tommy started sleeping better. I began telling him bedtime stories again, always about brave animals escaping cages or finding secret passageways. He never asked what they meant. He just listened and smiled and held my hand until he drifted off. Storytelling became my rebellion, my truth wrapped in metaphor. I dreamed often of Mama, but now in my dreams, she didn't disappear. She stood with me. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me, "You're almost there. Keep going." I'd wake up with that image burned into my heart, and it made the days just a little more bearable. Aunt Carol once told me, "You'll never survive without me." That day I smiled, just a little, because I had already started to. Not on the outside, maybe, but inside something was shifting. I wasn't the same girl she met after Mama's funeral. That girl had been terrified. This one was getting stronger. My silence had once been a cage. Now it was a shield. I stopped answering her in full sentences. I responded with nods, with quiet obedience that made her underestimate me. She didn't see the fire returning to my eyes, didn't see the part of me she hadn't broken, and I was preparing. For what? I didn't know yet, but I felt it. A pull, a push, like the wind just before a storm. I promised that something would give, and when it did, I would be ready. I wouldn't run without a plan. I wouldn't scream unless someone could hear. But I would not stay silent forever. Because now I understood something she never did. That even when you're buried deep, you're still alive. And one day, even the smallest seed breaks through the dirt, toward the light, toward freedom. The night everything snapped started like so many others. Heavy, thick with dread. The air so still it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I'd put Clara and Tommy to bed early, hoping to avoid her. I was wiping down the kitchen counters, stalling before locking myself in the room when I heard it. Her footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and something in the way they moved made the hair on my arms stand up. She called my name, soft as silk. Agnes! I froze. She was near, too near. I turned toward the hallway, heart pounding, and there she was, standing in the doorway, smiling like the wolf in the storybooks. "Let's talk," she said. I didn't answer. I just stepped back. She stepped forward. In that moment, everything I had prepared in silence became real. I ran, no plan, no thought, just instinct. I tore down the hallway and into the bedroom where Clara and Tommy slept. I slammed the door shut and dragged the dresser in front of it. My siblings shot up, frightened, but I didn't explain. I pressed my back against the door and whispered, "Don't say a word. Don't move." I held a screwdriver in one hand, a flashlight in the other, and tried not to tremble. She came, banged on the door with her fists, snarling like an animal. "Open up!" she hissed. "You little brat!" I didn't answer. Inside me, a new voice rose, not one of fear, but of defiance. Clara clung to me, Tommy started to cry, and I shushed them gently but firmly. "We're safe," I lied. "I won't let her in." And I meant it. We stayed like that for hours. She screamed, then she laughed, then she went quiet. I didn't move the dresser, I didn't sleep. I stared at the door as if my will alone could keep it shut. And maybe it did, because eventually the footsteps faded. Her voice disappeared, and we were still there, breathing, whole. At sunrise, I opened the window and climbed out with Clara and Tommy. I didn't look back. We crept through the backyard, barefoot in the dew, hearts pounding. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to go. I led them across town to the only person I trusted, Mrs. Florence. She answered the door in her robe, and before I could speak, she pulled us all inside. I told her everything. The truth poured out of me like a flood. Her face went pale. She didn't ask why I waited. She didn't doubt. She believed me, every word. That was the first miracle. She called the sheriff, then the pastor, then my father. It all happened fast, a blur of voices and questions and hands on shoulders. But through it all, I felt something new, safety. My father cried when he saw me, fell to his knees in the middle of Mrs. Florence's kitchen. "I didn't know," he said over and over. I wanted to scream at him, but I didn't. I just stood there, holding Clara and Tommy's hands, and said, "It's not about what you didn't know. It's about what you'll do now." And he nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw him, really saw him, as someone who could protect us. That night we didn't go back. Aunt Carol never came near us again. I heard rumors that she left town, that she was questioned, that she moved in with a cousin upstate. But I didn't care. She no longer controlled my silence. She no longer lived in the corners of my sleep. If this part touched you, please like the video so that more people can find strength through this story. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a child can do is say, "No more." And even if no one hears it at first, eventually someone will. And that's when the world begins to change. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no perfect arrests, no courtroom victories, no news stories that made people gasp. But there was peace. And that, to me, was everything. After we left, we stayed with Mrs. Florence for a few weeks, while my father found us a small rental house on the edge of town. It was run down, smelled like mothballs, and the windows rattled when the wind blew. But it was ours, and it was safe. We started over quiet. My father got help. He stopped drinking, started working regularly again. He didn't talk about the past much, and I didn't ask him to. He showed his remorse not in words, but in the way he brushed Clara's hair before school or packed my lunch in the morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, a beginning. I went back to school that fall. Miss Ethel welcomed me like I'd never left. She pulled me into a hug and whispered, "I always knew you'd come back." I sat in the front row, took notes like my life depended on it, and maybe it did. Because education, for me, wasn't just about books. It was a ladder out of the dark. Each page I turned was a step away from everything I'd survived. Clara and Tommy healed, slowly but surely. Clara became quiet but fierce, the kind of girl who stands between others and the world. Tommy smiled more, drew pictures again. And I found work after school cleaning houses, saved every penny. Eventually, I became the cook at a local elementary school. I poured love into every meal, just like Mama had, and I watched hundreds of children eat, laugh, grow, safe. I never saw Aunt Carol again. I didn't need to. Her shadow no longer followed me. I'd taken my power back, piece by piece, over years of hard work and healing. And the girl she tried to erase? She grew up. She lived. She forgave, but never forgot. Because forgetting would mean it didn't matter. And it did. Today, at 72, I stand in my small kitchen with the sun on my face and the smell of cinnamon in the air. My grandchildren run barefoot in the backyard. I watch them and smile, not just because they're happy, but because I helped make a world where they can be. I sell pies now. I tend my flowers. And when I close my eyes at night, I no longer flinch. I rest. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps me keep these stories alive. And tell me in the comments, what did you feel listening to this? Because what I've learned is this: survival is only the first chapter. The real power comes when we tell the story, when we speak the truth, when we remind each other, even in the darkest moments, we are never truly alone.